I am Helen Cuthbert. I'm Policy and Stakeholder Manager at AELP. And I have been asked to give you an update about kind of some of the changes that we have had through Ofsted recently. So following, I'd say, a pretty tumultuous year last year, and kind of the reset that they have started to approach and kind of what this means for yourselves as training providers and for the sector as a whole. So I guess it was a bit of a new year, new start for Ofsted. They had a new chief inspector start on the 1st of January, Sir Martin Oliver, and he took up that post. He's come from a schools background, so he was in charge of a multi-academy trust, and has been really open about the fact that actually he hasn't necessarily had much of a background within the FE and skills kind of sector, but he's really open to learning about that. And one of the things that AELP are in the process of organising is for him to go on a tour around training providers, and as our CEO Ben says, he wants him to be able to smell the vim. So he doesn't want him to go to the head offices. He wants him to be able to go into the workshops, into the training labs and centres, and experience what it's like travelling between different employers, travelling to see the apprentices in those organisations. And so we're in the process of organising that in North Yorkshire and York, around the region that he is based. So I think that will hopefully be a really beneficial introduction for him as well to the work that so many of you do in the sector. January also started a large piece of work for them in the response to the death of Ruth Perry and the inquest that was heard at the end of last year. Basically, the Section 28 notice for the prevention of future deaths was released towards the end of last year, and they had to respond in early January. And as part of that, the inspections at the beginning of the year were paused for a number of weeks whilst they undertook a large proportion of training, particularly around mental health and how to support people whilst they were on inspection. I think it's safe to say that there has been seen a change from those that are reporting back having had inspections, and it's definitely being seen kind of within inspections that kind of consideration is being taken into account. I think potentially it's needing to settle down a little bit. For those of you that might have had an inspection since, I think some people may have said that it's felt almost a little bit too much now. But as they're finding their way, we hope that will settle down. So they've been having a large portion of training. They've also announced some changes towards elements of their complaints policy and also their pause policy. We've also finally had the Education Select Committee have also done a report, particularly focusing on their work in schools, but there are elements of that will, in time, filter through to our sector as well, and the government have responded to that. One of the key elements that you may have seen has been around single word judgments in terms of inspection reports and where that might sit going forward. The government currently are saying that they do not see that changing. However, Ofsted seem to be open because also Labour have said that they would move to a scorecard approach. So again, over the next year, as we lead into the general election, as Sue was saying, it could be all change, and we'll have to see kind of where that goes. So, what changes have we had? Well, in January, we had changes around kind of resolving concerns during inspection and trying to ensure that they are resolved as soon as possible. And now all providers can have a call with a senior inspector the day after an inspection. So if there's anything that you have picked up on kind of during your inspection, but you've not had a chance to raise, or you've gone away after they've left and you've gone, damn, I wish I'd said that, or I'd wish I'd flagged this. That is kind of your opportunity to do that, and for that to be kind of not necessarily taken into account so it will change gradings, but it does enable you to kind of have an additional element of reflection in your reports, for example. And then from April, there was the changes to the post-reporting and complaints process. So as you all know, you get a chance to have factual accuracy checks, purely kind of on the factual content, not like grammar, etc., and to make sure that they've not made anything that is wholly inappropriate. However, on receipt of that report now, you can either go through that factual accuracy check process, or you can actually go straight to a written complaint if you are unhappy kind of with the outcomes in the respect of how the process was delivered. And previously, you'd have to go through a 3-step process. So the third step being an internal review, once you'd made the complaint, if you were still not happy prior to it going external and being looked at by an external body. However, that step has now been removed because it was felt that this was too much like Ofsted when marking their own homework. And now, after the second step complaint, you would go straight to the independent adjudicator, and obviously they would look at that and make decisions as to whether to uphold and enforce change, or whether actually, no, Ofsted were right and everything should stay as it is. So that's been in place since the 5th of April. And obviously it will take time to see kind of what the impact of that is, but it's something that we'll be keeping an eye on and we'll report back to the sector and to members on. So at the same time, we've also had additional changes, particularly around pausing inspection. So when we've heard recently at our events, at AELP events, from Richard Pemble and others, they think this will be used in very, very limited circumstances. I think Richard said himself that he can't necessarily see where he would have used this on an inspection. There may have only been like 1 or 2 times during his career that he would have used it. However, the capability and the possibility of pausing inspection is there, because there is now the recognition that actually sometimes there are instances where it would be wholly inappropriate to continue, particularly if there's something that's affected the provider and their staff as a whole. For example, a death or an incident locally that has very much kind of would not be appropriate for that focus to be on Ofsted inspection, and actually focus needs to be on staff and learner wellbeing. So it will be considered on a case-by-case basis, and they would be using their published guidance. So it's very important to kind of make sure that you have reviewed kind of the latest versions of the handbook, but also associated guidance, for example, the pausing inspection policy. And this has been a combination where they've now combined the pausing inspection, but also deferral processes together into one. So there are now at least less documents for you to look at. And then the final change that I wanted to talk about is around provider gradings. So at the moment, this hasn't been implemented yet for further education and skills. It has started with the schools and early years sixth form settings. However, they are in the process of starting to bring the gradings for the sub-judgments onto the main Ofsted inspection page. So you will no longer see just good, requires improvement, outstanding, inadequate as your overall grade. You will be able to see the sub-judgments. And if you do see this in a school context, for example, if some of you are governors, then you'll be able to see that now. And we expect that that will progress in time through to FE and skills. But obviously, it's a massive piece of work to make that change to the whole of their provision that they look after, and so they are doing it in stages, and obviously as a result of kind of where some of these changes have come from, they're focusing on schools first. So where are we up to? And I'm hoping that you can see this. We will hopefully get the slides over to people later. But up until the end of April this year, we're in quite a good position, actually. So I last saw these stats based off the end of January. And what's really satisfying is that whilst the number of inspections have increased, the percentages and the split between good, outstanding, requires improvement, inadequate have broadly stayed the same. So actually we're in quite a consistent phase at the moment in terms of responses. So as you can see, overall, 69% of inspections that have happened during this academic year have led to a good outcome. 10% have been outstanding. And then, as you can see, there is a smaller percentage, just over 20%, are either requires improvement or deemed inadequate for full inspections. You can also see that we've got quite a difference in terms of split through the different types of provision. But overall, it is looking relatively positive for this time, and does seem to, at the moment, to have been an improvement on previous years, or at least maintaining the same. And then, unfortunately, I couldn't quite get this updated to the same point as April, so we have this through to the end of February. However, as you can see, that where you've got the split through the different sub-judgments, again, broadly positive, but obviously there is still some work to happen, particularly as you can see kind of within the apprenticeships, but also the quality of education, there is still a lesser proportion of good and outstanding. There's more requires improvement. However, you can see through the different gradings that actually providers generally do incredibly well within the behaviours and attitudes sub-judgment, as that is kind of the biggest proportion of people generally getting good, even if other judgments have not been so great. So just wanted to touch a little bit on the Big Listen. So this is another initiative that has been coming out of Ofsted over the last few months, and has directly linked into where Smart and Oliver is wanting to hear from the organisation, and also part of this kind of reset approach. So the Big Listen is taking place from March until the end of this month. It closes on the 31st of May. And Ofsted have been really clear to say that nothing is off the table. They're very much open to all suggestions. They may not necessarily be in their gift, their wheelhouse, but they're willing to have those conversations. So, for example, as I've mentioned, single word judgments isn't actually theirs to change themselves. They would have to get ministerial approval. However, they're saying that that isn't something that they're against doing. They want to hear from you. The weird, the wacky, the wonderful. They would like to know what's kind of how they feel that you're doing. No, how you feel they are doing, and where kind of they can make changes that would make it easier, recognising that even in the best will in the world, an inspection is still going to have an element of additional stress and anxiety, probably because nobody likes being judged. However, they want to obviously make that process as stress-free as possible, whilst also recognising the quality that is there. So the Big Listen is focusing on 4 key areas: how Ofsted report their findings, how they carry out their inspections, what impact they can have on the sectors that they inspect. So this isn't just a education, further education and skills area. This is every type of Ofsted inspection. So you may well have been asked to do this as a parent, or involved in other education settings as well. And what do they need to do to be a world-class regulator that is trusted? And I think that is the bit that they're really wanting to also focus on, is that they recognise that over the last year or so, in certain areas, that trust element has maybe waned and hasn't necessarily been there to the same level. And they're looking at ways that they can try and improve that and get that back. So, AELP as an organisation, on behalf of our members, are in the process of responding. We have been writing a response over the last couple of months to respond to this. And our kind of key areas that we're focusing on are listed on there, but focusing particularly on the feedback that we're getting from our members about the gap between good and requires improvement almost being too big, and that previously we used to have an additional kind of 5th grade, well, we've actually gone from 7 grades down to 4, but we were thinking around having an extra 5th grade put back in the middle, to recognise that there is a vast stage between a good providers and requires improvement at times, and recognising that actually you can be very much on the verge of being outstanding, or you could be very much on the verge of being requires improvement, and they are kind of masses apart. So looking at including an additional grade, but also looking at whether there can be a reflection of where providers have the requirement to improve or the capacity to improve. We recognise, and I think generally it's seen, that particularly within the ITP area, but as you've heard from Lucy and co earlier, that also some employers very much have that kind of cut-off between different gradings as to whether you can access different types of contracts. But particularly for ITPs, a grade 4 is incredibly detrimental. You don't get that element of support that you would necessarily if you were a college or a school, and that parachuting in of additional support, resources, etc., it often leads to contract withdrawal. But it's also recognising that sometimes the best of intentions can be there, but can also lead to not having the grades on the day that go the way that you would like, and recognising that actually capacity to improve and building on maybe where the accountability framework is also looking at where providers have that capacity to improve if changes in support is given. We're also recognising that there needs to be an improvement in the consistency of inspection. This has improved, but we still feel that there is work to go, particularly in terms of providers reporting that they still have areas where inspectors are not necessarily au fait with the type of provision that they're teaching, particularly within apprenticeships, and not necessarily knowing, kind of not having delivered work-based learning, understanding the challenges, etc. And so recognising that we need people from the sector and also inspectors to be aware and consistently approaching how they deliver inspection. And that's to ensure that everyone is getting that fair chance and that they are receiving, no matter their size or the areas that they're working in, that they're experiencing the same level of inspection. So it is a fair playing field. Thirdly, we're looking at trying to look at introducing some more parity in terms of notification periods. Last year, we had the large and complex expansion, so up to 6 days. The skills element of college inspections also receives 6 days notice, but everyone else generally receives 2 days notice. And I think we all know that by the time you've had your phone call and then you've had your second phone call, you've kind of lost at least half a day of that. And if you've got multiple sites, just because you're large and complex doesn't necessarily mean you're not operating around the country and that you've got multiple different staff. in different locations and employers of different sizes to try and ensure that you can kind of get everyone and all your ducks in the row. So actually you've got the best chance to have a good inspection and have inspectors speak to the people that they need to speak to. So this isn't necessarily about increasing the time that you're all on edge wondering, are we going to get a phone call? But it's about actually hoping and making it fairer for people to have that time to get that admin done, and recognising that that can sometimes take longer than the 2 days to get a really good programme ready for an inspector, because everything obviously does change at the last minute. So yeah, looking at that one as point 3. We'd also like Ofsted to only include in inspection and in reports items that have been funded directly either by DfE or by combined authorities. This is reflecting on the fact that British values, for example, is a key criteria within behaviours and attitudes, within personal development, but no one's actually funded to deliver this. So again, kind of looking at where that support can be given for providers so that you are being able to focus your efforts, not saying not to do it, but actually maybe using this as a lever to get that as a funded element if that is something that is felt so strongly should be included within an inspection. Likewise, elements like careers, for example, we know that this can be challenging in some areas, particularly when you're employer provider or you're working with multiple employers, and how you approach that. Again, it's this value added activity, but should it actually be a grade criteria in terms of leading into your overall grading? And then finally, we're also wanting to ensure that the continuation of inspector involvement and engagement and opportunities for providers to engage and learn directly from inspectors is continued. So we, as AELP, run a number of Day with Ofsted events, which have been really, really helpful and give that kind of inside track in terms of what inspectors are thinking. But we find that they're really useful. And I think this is a difference between our element of the sector and some of the broader kind of changes that are happening, particularly within schools, that when you hear of stories around Ofsted, etc., there does feel like there is a different relationship that the FES area has than it does potentially in early years, in childminding, and in schools of element. And we really want that to continue because we think it's really valuable both for providers but also for inspectors to be able to actually understand what's going on. Generally, inspectors have been someone on the ground previously, but they might not have been in a provider for a very long time unless you're kind of an independent, an Ofsted inspector who is doing it as an additional element of a role. And so you can lose touch with kind of where you're up to, what's happening, how it's like to be on the ground. And so we want to make sure that that interface still continues. And then lastly, the reporting. This is one of those things that I think is be careful what you wish for. We don't necessarily want a whole-scale change of reports. We recognise that to some extent it's useful for providers that they aren't giving lots of detail, but equally there are elements that maybe could be expanded upon, and recognising that at the moment, potentially for others that use those reports, it is difficult to sometimes gauge kind of exactly how a provider is doing, where they maybe do have that capacity to improve, because they're almost too brief in some instances, but recognising that on the actual day, nominees and shadows do get a very high detailed level of feedback. And so balancing the two things, recognising that actually if we don't have too much change, maybe a little bit of extra detail to aid other organisations in their changes and in their thinking, but actually that there is still a benefit sometimes to providers that not all of their secrets are shared. and not all of that is put in the public domain, so that you can have that element of competitivity and I guess trade secrets in your own organisation. So yeah, we're kind of trying to balance that act, not wanting to, as seems to be the favourite phrase of the sector at the moment, throw the baby out with the bathwater, but also recognising that there is potentially still scope for some change there. And then I'm hoping that I've brought us to a coffee break, unless there's any questions anyone's got.
Oh, yeah. Has anybody got any questions for Helen?
Stunned you all into silence. That's fine.
Thank you.
So no worries. Sorry.